All right. Well, I'm very, very excited today. I have one of my favorite people on planet Earth on a call with me right now. Um, man, Monica, you are one of the people that I hold very highly in my mind, and I have so much respect for you. We met, geez, I don't even want to say how many years ago now, but it makes me feel old. Uh, we graduated in 2014 together from physical therapy school. And um, yeah, we went through the struggle of PT school together. We graduated and kept in touch from afar, kind of, and we're kind of like rooting each other on from afar and keeping in touch here and there. And I just really love seeing all your success in your personal life and your professional life. And I want to thank you for coming on this call today because I think it's really, really going to help a lot of people. So with that, Monica, why don't you take it away and tell us a little bit about who you are, why I harassed you and forced you to come on this call, and a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was like very nice for you to say. Yeah. So we met back in PT school over 10 years ago. And, at that point in time, we both went into PT for different reasons, maybe. But my history with why I got into PT and why I practice the way that I practice today is I was a former dancer. My journey into the world of health and movement started then. I became very passionate in the art form, which led me into having a college career in dance. So I received my Bachelor of Fine Arts in Dance Performance. And through that journey, I just learned how things were being run in certain institutions and perhaps even like with some of my injuries. It was really hard for me to find people that understood like where I came from, that I had to continue to dance, but not stop, but then maybe stop. And, what are some things that I could have done better? That led me to, going to PT school and becoming the practitioner I am today. I think that's very valuable when you're looking to find a practitioner that understands a little bit more about what it's like to be, whether in a competitive sport, whether a competitive art form, because you understand you were part of that once, right? All of the mental struggles, the physical struggles that we have to go through to get there. I think it's good to appreciate. So now I am a physical therapist and I co-own Amp Performance Rehab, which is an outpatient clinic. We are located inside a gym. We work really well with the coaches here, essentially to create an individualized plan that is going to help the athlete, whether it is going back to sport, whether it's to increase movement patterns, or whether it is pre or post surgery. And we have two locations, one in Chester and one in Rockaway. I'm primarily in the Chester location, and that's what I do now. I also am a professor at Montclair State, where I work with a lot of the dancers there. I'm one out of 3 PTs that they have on staff. And obviously that's something I'm very passionate about because I was there before. So I do appreciate that they now have therapists, they have people in their support group to help dancers, performing artists, just be better and stay injury free.
That's really cool. So you were a dancer first, and then
Yes,
your journey through dance kind of led you to physical therapy, and you kind
correct.
of realized that there was this gap between someone like yourself who was passionate and driven and working hard at this craft of dance, and there was no one that really spoke your language in the medical field or PT world. And it was almost like you were just treated like any other person. um Stop working, stop training, stop doing this, and you get the generic kind of treatment for different things that you would have, and you were left with more questions than anything.
Yeah.
So you kind of made yourself the practitioner that you wish you had when you were younger.
Yeah, absolutely. I also wasn't really aware of what rehab professionals were or who to go to throughout my journey. Um, I honestly didn't even know what a physical therapist was all the time, or chiropractic care, or like anything. My job was to, do well in school and to perform, to attend rehearsals, to work on my technique and my skill. And, that was primarily it. And I wish I had someone perhaps, guiding me, even if it wasn't in any pain or had any recent injuries, but just to perhaps even take me to the next level a little bit, right? I thoroughly enjoyed my time as a dancer. I definitely do not regret it, but I can see ways where I could have just become a little bit better and have a better understanding of my body that I later learned in PT school, and later adapted to some of the athletic things I always wanted to do, but I never did because I was scared because of the, misconceptions along the way that we shouldn't lift or we shouldn't be running. Later on, I became very successful in terms of like learning how to lift weights and, signing up for things I never thought I could ever do because I was scared to get injured, because that's what I was brought up with.
Yeah. I think you hit on a lot there that I'd love to dive into. But before we do that, I do want to just ask, how did the position at Montclair State come to be? How did you get involved with that? The teaching position.
So some of my professors I went to Mason Grove School of the Arts Conservatory at Rockbridge University. Some of my professors there are now professors at Montclair State. So when they were looking for a part-time therapist, they reached out to me. And I think that we'll talk later about this, but creating a good support system is very helpful, both in professional world and personal world. People remember who you are. People remember how you spoke to them, how you conducted yourself. And I think that's what has honestly helped me in my professional career be able to achieve things like this.
How did you feel when you got that call or that email when they asked you if you'd be interested in taking that position?
I thought it was so cool. I thought it was something that I never really thought about because I was, opening up a clinic and developing my model. And it was just an amazing thing that they called me, and working with the dancers has been fantastic. Honestly, I'm able to have connections with these artists that they understand a little bit more about what PT is, not because they have to be injured, they have to come to see me, but they enjoy coming to therapy. They create that trust with me. I'm able to introduce certain movements that maybe they never did. I mean, I know that firsthand. So, I love it. I love working with the dancers.
What kind of dance did you do when you are you still dancing, or is that something that you kind of have moved on from, but still dabble in a little bit? Like, what was your type of dance? Like, what did you do?
So I primarily did modern and ballet, and so like contemporary. And the school I went to was heavy on choreography. So exploring that part of my artistic journey was really important. But a lot of it was heavy on technique, right? And maintaining it. So not only gaining the skill and the technique, but then gaining it and then transferring that over to performance. What does that mean? It means when I had 6 or 7 performances in a row, and maintaining that level of skill throughout that time was something that, is a big part of the artist.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really well said. I think one of the things that I have kind of gotten more comfortable with during my career is this whole holistic, like, biopsychosocial approach to patient care. And I guess the way that I interpret that is when people walk in the door, it's not a knee or a shoulder or a lower back. It's a person, it's a human, it's a person with biases coming in. It's a person with thoughts and beliefs. It's people of different cultures. It's people with different anxieties and stressors, and I think, and different goals too, right? We always try to get to, yes, you have pain, but you're not here for me to get you out of pain. What do you want to get back to doing? What's the why behind why you're coming here? Do you want to hold your child someday? Do you want to walk your daughter down the aisle at the wedding? So I think that to me is what the whole, like, holistic biopsychosocial approach is to patient care. Now, this is going to be mainly geared toward figure skaters, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that there's a lot of overlap in the demands of being a figure skater as being a dancer. Am I correct in thinking that?
Certainly, there's certain things that overlap for sure. I do have like, a little bit of experience. Like I told you, working with some of the figure skaters in previous jobs, and I definitely related a lot of things that I went through with them, and some misconceptions too along the way. So I do agree with you and everything that you're saying about the holistic approach. That's the way I practice. That's the way that I wish people saw me before, and not just see me for a knee pain or shoulder pain or back pain. Because one thing is that you can achieve things in your clinic, but then how do you make it go over into performance? And I think that's where a lot of things get lost and a lot of people get discouraged, because there isn't that connection and there isn't practitioners that understand the demands of the sport. You know, now with social media, a lot of people go online, they see this like crazy changes from one day to another, but they're not seeing the athlete in their world. So that's also very important to consider why a holistic approach is so important, because it's not just what we see from day one to day two.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that plays a huge part, especially social media, like you said. I think that's a whole nother aspect of this that maybe we didn't have when we were younger. um, yeah. So, all right. So then if we have buy-in with this whole holistic approach and taking someone as a whole, when you see a young female dancer or figure skater that walks in your door, what's your approach? Like, how do you approach that? How do you approach that girl that walks in the door?
Yeah, so I mean, part of the holistic approach is seeing, the person as a whole body. We also have to appreciate that there's going to be other factors to this, right? Holistic approach to me is not only the physical aspects, but also the physiological aspects, the well-being of the person. What is their support system like? What is their performance like in terms of their training? Whether they're being homeschooled or whether they're going to school, right? All of that I have to appreciate and understand from the athlete that comes in through my door, not just movement patterns, right? We often forget that it's going to play a big deal and a big role if they have a support system and what that looks like, or they don't, right? Are they passionate about what they're doing? Are they doing it because they truly want to get better because they enjoy it, or they're doing it because perhaps other people told them that they're just really good at that sport, right? Or that art form. So find that balance. I think it's really important to understand where the athlete's coming from, because then that makes the assessment and my approach and our approach a lot easier to take on, because it's more than just, oh, let me just fix, X, Y, and Z, because ultimately we're looking at the person as a whole, and it's not just movement patterns, but also everything else. How are they managing stress? What stressors are there in their lives? It could be very different, the stressors that affect me, that affect you. So same thing with any type of athlete that comes in through the door. How are they managing that? What is like their daily, food intake look like? What does their stresses look like? What does their diet look like? And I have to respect that and consider that in my approach, right? A lot of people have different types of diets, and I want to know. And not saying that it's a bad thing or a good thing. I just need to know who is the athlete that is in front of me first.
Yeah. I think that's, I hope everyone is listening, because that's really, really valuable. Um, Kind of going off that, what do you see as some of the common trends, like with physical injury, but also these other things that we're talking about, stressors, possible disordered eating or body image issues? I know these sports rely heavily on the way that the athlete looks and the weight that they're stepping on the ice or on the stage at. And these will stick to mostly the young female. these girls are also going through other changes in their life. So they're also going through hormonal changes. They're growing in ways that maybe they didn't grow before. They're trying to find their way in the world, trying to find out who they are, on top of having this competitive um, drive and perhaps expectations that they have to meet from their friends and family. So what are some of the common, I guess, what are some of the common like physical issues or injuries that you see? And then what are also some of the common not physical things? So like the psychosocial aspect of that. And then if this isn't too many questions in one, do you think that there is enough awareness of these things? Do you think there's a lot of openness and I guess enough safe places for these things to be talked about?
Yeah. So some of the common trends I definitely see are physical injuries, repetitive physical injuries, right? Whether that be an ankle, whether that be low back. Trends that I see is something hurts, I rest, take some anti-inflammatories, it feels better, nothing changes in my routine, I have it again. That now creates frustration, right? Now that creates, well, what can I do for it not to, come back without any guidance? So definitely when it comes to injuries, I just see reoccurring injuries because it's just hasn't been looked at, hasn't been taken care of, and now it's causing a lot more frustration and anxiety to someone who is in a very competitive state. I also see some, body dysmorphia, really, their image of what this body feels like or needs to look like, which can lead from, some eating disorders, or can lead to eating disorders, and also just a negative self-body image. It's very hard when you are either practicing in front of a stage, a mirror, someone with a camera, because that performance light goes on and you want to look a certain way, you want to feel a certain way. And it's very different what you see in a mirror versus what you see in a video, how you actually see yourself. So understanding that, it's hard as a performer. I've been through it, but those are some of the common trends that I see. And then overall, just burnout, right? I see that way too much with a lot of our female athletes, and you mentioned it and you hit it right on the nail. You're going through a lot of hormonal changes, right? That's something that is naturally occurring in your body, and now you add deprived sleep, maybe not enough of certain nutrients, or even nutrients do change, right? Through our female cycle, right? There has been a lot of research that supports that perhaps you should be eating or more emphasized things throughout a cycle, right? And how is that being managed on top of increased activities and exercise and strengthening? So I think that's where it comes into play, having a practitioner that understands that realm. And yes, I really think that we are moving in a direction where we can have more open discussions. I see it now through social media. I think that's something that's been positive about a lot of this, trend that's happening, is that we can talk, we have podcasts. But I really still think that there should be now a multidisciplinary approach between everyone, coaches, rehab professionals, parents, and the athlete itself too, right? What are the needs? Are the expectations being set? And how we can make this realistic? What are some alternatives? We want that child and we want that athlete, we want that teenager to really enjoy being, their age and going through the process. But we have to keep that line of communication open consistently, not just when things are heading in a different direction that is not ideal.
How do you facilitate that? How do you facilitate a stranger coming in who's 13-year-old female? How do you go from day one where things are awkward and quiet and one word answers to opening up about things that perhaps they don't open up to anyone else about? How do you set that environment of safety and like safe communication?
Well, I think what has worked with me is, one, finding something to connect with, right? Two, also educating, like my female athlete. It's totally normal that certain things are occurring, right? I never want to make them feel injured. I never want to make them feel like we have to fix something, right? I want them to feel comfortable coming to me. That experience starts even before they walk in through the door, right? And I'm educating them because I do want to create a change. And I'm educating in the way where they understand it and they can relate. Or even just like retest things, right? A lot of my female athletes like to feel like, oh wow, like that just feels so much better. Awesome. Great. Like I'm giving them an objective measure that they can check themselves. Oh, if I do Monica stretch, this feels better. Awesome. I'm creating a connection, right? Hearing them if they need some type of resources without stepping other boundaries. So, having open communication with my parents, with my trainers. Hey, maybe this is something that you might consider. Here are some resources that I've done, that I've given to people that you might benefit from reading yourself, or perhaps even another professional that can come into play. But it's also the way you do it, right? I think a lot of people can benefit from, mental health services. I think that especially as a teenager, you're going through a lot of different changes, and it's very hard to talk to people that are perhaps guiding you in skill or parenting you. And sometimes opening to someone else can open up that conversation, that maybe there is something that I can work toward, that I can work on just to make me an overall better athlete. And also just people that understand your demands. So I have some female, athletes who have told me, yeah, I go to someone, but they don't really get me. They don't understand. I just do the same thing every time I go, and it's discouraging. So now I think rehab is like that all across the board. So what I tell people is, give yourself some grace. Sometimes things don't work out, just like anything else. Different people treat differently. People see things in different light. Give that opportunity to see, like, maybe there could be someone else that can help me. If someone in particular didn't.
That's such a key point. How people will say that they tried physical therapy and it didn't work. That's kind of like saying I tried cereal and I didn't like it. Like if you go to the grocery store aisle, there's 100 different kinds of cereal. Everyone is so different. And if someone is an expert in pitchers in baseball, that's great, but maybe the bodybuilder shouldn't go to them, or maybe the figure skater shouldn't go to them. Maybe you should find that person that gets you. And maybe the practitioner is really qualified and just a really, really skilled clinician, but they're just not connecting with you. Those are all reasons to look elsewhere, right? And I think you made a great point about mental health and physical health. And I think I guess not so much anymore, but I think it still exists. There's like this negative view around mental therapy, but you don't need to be in a crisis to go to mental therapy, just like you don't need to be hurt to go to physical therapy. These things almost should be ingrained in your normal day-to-day life, especially if you are expecting to be this high-level athlete at such a young age. I know that when I was a teenager, I couldn't possibly do what these girls are doing that I'm seeing. Like I just didn't have the mental, like I just wasn't mature enough to do that. And yeah, I think the ability uh to overcome that and then level up almost, and you're kind of forced to mature in all aspects of your life. That's one of the things that I've seen too, is not only are these athletes kind of leveling up in their sport, but the way that they talk, you just don't hear teenagers talk like that. Like they're kind of mature all around. So I give them a lot of credit. And the other thing that you mentioned was how you don't want to take time off. Like if there is some kind of pain, that doesn't mean that you have to stop everything you're doing.
Mhm.
And that's a principle of physical rehabilitation, no matter who we're working with, whether it's a bodybuilder, whether it's an average general population person or figure skater, dancer. The idea of of this kind of graded exposure to the goal at hand. So if someone has say lower back pain, for example, what we don't want to do is just stop training, because
Mm.
we have built up all this capacity from all the load that we've been putting onto them. Good load meaning training, um, and any kind of strengthening that we do. We kind of build up this capacity as we increase our load. So if we then just stop training and drop our load all the way down, all that built up capacity is going to now slowly drop as well. And then when we get back into it, like you said before, we don't know where to start. And then we can flare up that pain again because it never really got taken care of. So the approach I think that you and I are talking about is, okay, you have pain. Instead of dropping down to 0, why don't we just go from 10 to 8 and see if that decreases your symptoms, and we'll hang out there for a little bit, and then we'll take a baby step to like 8.5 and then 9, and we'll kind of slowly do this dance of making these small modifications until that pain is desensitized and we're still maintaining a training effect as best we could, because we're still doing our craft, but we're just kind of modifying it. That's great. But sometimes in this equation of calming things down and building them back up, sometimes the load just completely exceeds our ability to recover from it. And like we were talking about before, I think before we were recording, sometimes a bit of time off is exactly what we need, just to kind of revamp the system a little bit, like Control Alt Delete, and just kind of rest, recover, maybe do something other than ice skating or dancing. Maybe go out and go for a run, or like ride a bike, or go swimming, or just do anything other than your craft for like a day or two or even longer, and then go back into it
Mm.
with a whole new energy, almost like if you continue to chop a tree down with a dull axe, you're probably better off stopping, sharpening it for a little bit, and then going back and having your slices be that much more effective each time. So I think that's really, really important too, because that's one of the misconceptions that I see a lot is, in the treatment approach, things like electric stim or massage or joint manipulation, or adjusting people's hips and spines, and to me, those things perhaps have a place, but that can't be the focus of the treatment. And I think a lot of
Mm.
times that's what, it's to no fault of their own. I think that's just what the mainstream social media and media are kind of putting in our faces, are these sexy kind of modalities. But really those are these short-term kind of pain modulating things. But the crux of the treatment is going to be this kind of graded exposure and loading our tissues, but just in a way that isn't going to provoke the pain. Um, and then another story I just wanted to share, talking about the whole athlete and how this can really be serious. Right before the pandemic, I treated a girl who was trying out for the Rockettes, and I she had just come out of a very dark place, and she was out of this dark place, and she was able to talk about it and be comfortable talking about it because she was doing so much better at this point. But she was coming to me for a fracture in her foot, and they were dancing like 8 hours a day, like 6 days a week. It was crazy the amount of training that they were doing. Um, and she was fracturing left and right, these tiny fractures in her feet because she wasn't eating. She was diagnosed anorexic. She had stopped getting her period. She was maybe 22, 23 years old, stopped getting her period. She was losing her hair, and her bones were getting brittle. So she had early onset like osteoporosis, and she was fracturing bones in her feet. Um, that was the lowest of the low for her, and she was doing it all because she was so laser focused on this goal of hers, was to be a Rockette. So we rehabbed her, and she was doing better mentally, physically. We were getting her better. The pandemic hit, we continued virtually, and she was doing really, really well. And she had this big audition that she got selected out of like, hundreds or thousands of girls for this tryout or audition tryout. It's like, was high school baseball, like get our mitts and go try out. I guess an audition is the right word. And it got canceled at the last minute because of the pandemic. And after that, we had a tough conversation, because it wasn't going to happen again for another year. So either she kept up this lifestyle for another year, or she changed course. And she decided to change course. She got engaged, married, honeymoon, wanted to start a family. The point of the story is that this was someone who was laser focused on a goal. And she took the toll, right? Like mentally and physically, and it all fell apart. And I think we have to make sure that if we're going to dive in headfirst into something and devote our lives to it, we have to make sure that we have something to fall back on. We have to make sure that we are maintaining our health physically and mentally, because if it does fall through, if something happens, who are you? Right. And I think that's really important, and kind of hits home these things that we're talking about and how significant they could really be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, that's definitely a great example of things that happen a lot. And the pandemic definitely showed us a lot of different avenues of things, even to slow down, to analyze a lot of, other aspects of our life. But something also to consider too is, right, Nick, is that everyone's experience with pain is so different. So, you know, pain can come in very various ways and different levels, both physical, and in other aspects of it. And an injury, especially a reoccurring injury, can cause many different types of pain, that we do have to acknowledge when we, analyze the risk reward of a situation. I often have to have conversations with my athletes when they get injured or they're in pain, and they have whether a tournament, a tryout, a competition, in the near future. What is the risk reward of it, right? Because if the risk is worth more than the reward, or vice versa, then we have to create a plan. And that's when, you and I come in, is that how can we better serve this population is through having a customized, individualized plan for that person, right? If they have a competition Friday versus next Friday, we're going to see that person very differently. So that's when we start to create a different mindset for our athletes, right? In this case, what you said, right, with this particular patient of yours in the past, is that you had to create a game plan for when they didn't have the audition anymore. And what does that look like? And then that way you are assessing all different avenues. When they come up with that decision, they feel comfortable with that decision because they have explored what my life would look like here and what my life would look like there. And therefore, they're not going to have that much anxiety, that much like disruption in their life, because I never thought, well, what if or what not, right? You already explored it. And I get that a lot with my athletes as well. It's like, do we need to slow down a little bit, or do we need to get through this tournament competition and then we need to reevaluate? And I agree with you. I think movement is really important. The type of movement, right, is also very important. Whether we focus more on skill development or whether we work more on, let's focus on getting you more, stronger in the core, having more access to certain mobility, whether it's your hip, shoulder, whatever it is that we're talking about, is something also to consider.
So I know everyone is different. Everyone that walks in our door is different. But would you be able to give us an example of like what a typical treatment session would look like for a young female, with like some nagging pain here and there, nothing really specific, but just we'll say low back pain. And so what would some of those things look like? What would the strengthening look like? What would the skill development look like? Just to give an idea, because I think sometimes the perception of physical therapy is like TheraBand, like exercises and like leg raises and kind of things like that. But I consulted with a physical therapist once who works with performers in like a circus and different acrobats and dancers. And when I was treating the Rockette, and I said, like, what can you tell me, like, with this kind of population, how do you go about it? And he said, honestly, they just have to lift some heavy things. So give us an example, Monica, of like some of the things. What would like the strengthening aspect look like? What would the skill development things look like? Is there agility exercises thrown in there? Like how does it look?
Well, it definitely depends on where they are in their competition schedule, right? I do have to respect the process that if they're working for something, it's going to look very different. Our sessions, if they're maybe off season or, after the finish competition, it's going to look a little bit different as well. But first of all, in their assessment, I wanted to look at everything. I'm looking at the shoulder, I'm looking at their hips, I'm looking at the way they rotate, I'm looking at the way they toe touch, I'm looking at the quality of movement, and also prioritizing what is most important for the female athlete in front of me. Am I driving mobility? Am I driving stability? Am I driving strength first? Right? I think they're all important, but I think the order does change according to their schedule. From there, I'm obviously want to access more mobility in certain areas of the body. And we work on an individualized warm-up that is appropriate for the athlete in front of me during that specific time, right? I don't care if they do 15, 20 warm-up activities. I care more about the quality of the movement that they are performing in front of me, whether that be 4 or 5 maybe exercises. But if they do it well, I want them to do it often, right? And are they making the changes that I want to see? Do they feel better? Now, once the body is prepped for that, this is where I can get more into perhaps enhancing movement patterns. And what does that mean, right? How are they getting on and off from the floor? How are their jumping mechanics, right? How are they landing? What does the feet look like when they're jumping? Let me see that and then take exercises that are going to perhaps effectively move them back into space. I see a lot of my female athletes a lot forward in space, right? I want to feel their heels. I want to feel their hamstrings, right? Even from that, they're already starting to feel things activate. They're still not they're getting stronger in a stance, in a movement pattern. From there, now I want to load them, right? I want to make sure that they have a pattern first, and I want them to have a good stack. What does that mean? Is everything nice in place, shoulders, hip, rib cage, all of the above, pelvis, all in a nice position where they can now generate a little bit of force and load, right? Now, what does that loading look like? It doesn't necessarily mean they have to now pick a 50-pound kettlebell and squat. It means, can they hold that position and move through space, right? Without any pain and as efficient as possible. After that, I definitely, add perhaps a cool down, emphasize why things are important and why things are going to be in a series for that particular individual. Not everybody has like 30 minutes or 40 minutes to warm up. So what do I need to prioritize? And something that they can stay consistent every single day. Obviously, yes, agility and skill set comes into play, but I think that's when the conversation between me or you and a trainer can get into place, right? How do we transition that like rehab performance world can start combining?
I love that you started that with, it all depends on where the athlete is in their season, proximity to competition, things like that. Because that's one of the things that I keep in mind is that, yes, we want to strengthen, we want to work on endurance, agility, things like that. But that's all load. And the main goal here is not to crush it in the PT office. The goal is to perform on the ice or perform on stage. So I have to be really aware of what's happening. Sometimes these girls are coming after a morning session on the ice. They're coming to see me. Then they have an afternoon session on the ice. So I'm not about to crush them with like heavy lifting to failure and like slow eccentrics. Sometimes when I get that, it's more of a light day and we're just kind of working on some skills or like some lighter load strengthening and nothing that's going to cause any real fatigue, because at the end of the day, we want to minimize overreaching with that fatigue. So that's a dance I'm constantly dancing is balancing that fatigue, because I know that we want to load and we want to give them this good load in the PT office, but at the same time we don't want to overreach them too much. How do you navigate that?
Well, I mean, again, it's just emphasis on, my athletes' movement patterns, right? I tell them all the time, if you can get the basics and we focus on those fundamentals, loading is the easiest part, really. And I have to stay in constant communication with the athletes, with the girls. For example, in the dance world, right? If I know they have like 3 or 4 shows coming up and performances, and that means that they wake up, they have an hour and a half warm up, and then they have an hour rehearsal, and then there's showtime for an hour, and they get a little break, and then they do the same thing at night, right? And they come to see me perhaps the next morning when I know they have to do that whole thing over again. Like you said, I need to appreciate like what they're going through and what their energy. I want to set them up for success. But once that stops, then our sessions are going to look a little bit different. And I'm going to load them up a little bit, right? Because if they just rest and do nothing, they have a rehearsal and they have a show in 7 days. So I need to make sure they stay in top shape and strong in order to effectively execute the upcoming shows and still stay injury free. So what do I do during that time is that I emphasize, we work on some movement patterns, things that are a little bit less loading, but more position based. So then I can load them in between.
Do you recommend, like, if you look at the year from a bird's eye view, do you recommend different phases, like perhaps like competition season where we're really pushing like being prepared for competition, that's our main goal, but then a few months where there aren't any immediate competitions and maybe we pull back on the skating or the dancing and focus more on like the strengthening and things like that? Or is it just a constant work on the craft and strengthening comes second? Or do you think it's more like cyclical, like you push the craft and then that takes a little bit of a backseat and then we can push more of the strength? And like how do you kind of square that circle of like
Yeah, that's tough.
yeah.
That's definitely tough because every figure skater has a different schedule, different intention. I worked with people who were going to the Olympics with figure skating. Their schedule looked very different than someone who was just working on the ice with skill for a competition coming up, right? Hard to say. Again, I think this is where a lot of the individualized program comes into place, but it needs to make sense. It has to also make sense for the athlete. They have to be like, okay, I understand what Nick is trying to do, and I'm on board with that. But again, it's really hard to say because there's different types of intent.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. But that's all part of it, right? Like we talked about,
Mhm.
getting used to the athlete, having that communication with parents, coaches, having everyone just feel free to express
Mhm.
our thoughts and be open to other opinions. Like if I think one thing, but then something is explained to me a little bit differently, and I'm like, okay, like that's fine, like it makes sense. So yeah, I think it all comes down to communication, I guess, and knowing the athlete, knowing the parents, the coaches. Um, the next
I
question I
agree with
have,
it.
Monica, is what so I, as you know, I'm a pro natural bodybuilder. I got into bodybuilding in like 2013, and I was in my early 20s. Um and I really dove in hard, and the seduction of competition and grinding myself into the ground and getting that trophy and pushing away everything else outside of bodybuilding. I get that. That's what happened early on in my bodybuilding career. And then you kind of mature in the sport and you realize, okay, I guess I can't just completely block out everything else. Like I have to be a bit well-rounded. And then you get more mature in the sport and marriage comes and kids come. And then all of a sudden this bodybuilding thing becomes you start to get more efficient in your training and things that you put your mental time to. And lo and behold, I get the same, if not better results, stressing way less and focusing more on time with my kids. And instead of going to the gym for 40 minutes to do cardio on a treadmill, I take my daughters for a walk in their carriage for 40 minutes. Right. So it's like the flexibility and the stress-free, just, this is more important in my life, but bodybuilding is also something that I do. Let's make it work together. I came across that in my late 20s and early 30s. Those things are happening to these athletes from the ages of 10 to 18. That makes me just question, like, do how important is life balance at that age? How important is not being super obsessed with one thing? And I guess, do you see athletes that want out but are afraid to disappoint people? They want that social life. They don't want to get up at 4 a.m. every morning, but they're just kind of feel stuck. And do you also see the ones that are kind of blinded by the whole thing and they don't realize what they're missing? And then they're going to wake up 10 years from now when they're 25 and realize, oh my goodness, I missed my whole adolescence because I was so tunnel vision and focused on this one goal. And like I said, I know that feeling, but I was much older when that happened to me. So what are your thoughts on that kind of conversation?
Well, I think a lot of people talk about life balance. I think it's definitely something important to consider in any age. Doesn't matter if you are 10, 14, or if you are in your 30s or in your 70s, right? What I think about is like that life, like that bucket concept, life bucket concept, right? You don't want to ever overflow your bucket. So it's going to change your life balance as you go through the spectrum of life. The important and the priority things that you take into consideration are going to change as we get older. And that's not a good or a bad thing. It's just, that's how it is. So we want that life bucket to be, whether it's training 50%, family 25%, oh, we got 25% more. What do? We never want to overflow that bucket. And acknowledging what goes into our bucket is really important. And that's when we have those conversations with our support system that we're going to continue to foster as we get older, right? Like, who are the people that we trust? And we need to work toward creating that support system. It's not just having someone, like having a physical therapist and seeing them like once every 6 months. It's like, no, we have to foster that relationship. So I think it is important to, one, define what is like work-life balance for you. Because I think everyone has a different definition of it. And are in different situations. And then what are the needs? Like, what does that need a 10-year-old or 11-year-old, right? What are the things that they want to do? It's very different than when we were 10 or 11 years old, what we enjoyed doing. There's just a lot of different things now that a lot of kids enjoy. So we have to find that balance of like, how do we provide and satisfy the needs of our children, but also, have a direction that we want to put them to, right? We can't just get them all play and then forget about homework. So I think that's something to consider in terms of having situations where people come to me and tell me they don't want to do things. 100%, I definitely have encountered that. And I think the fear comes because their parents have not only invested the time, but finances into things that they are currently doing. And that's super scary when you have, people remind them all the time, this is costing me this, or I'm working toward this for you, right? It puts a lot of pressure when you grow, when you're in that developing years of like, oh my God, like I have to perform because my mom and dad are working really hard for this and they remind me all the time. And the financial sacrifices that they're doing, I need to like meet their expectations. But then that's when we have that conversation of what are the expectations of that child, right? Which changes at 10 versus 18. So having that conversation with our children is so important to set the expectation because they're now in that mindset of that like young athlete. I'm reminded all the time, I have to do this. I have to do this to make my parents happy, to make my coaches happy. But now it's different. My expectations are different. Now I want to perhaps have a little bit more time with my friends. And again, everything's a balance in terms of like, awesome, you want to spend 2-3 hours with your friends. Let's make it work in your schedule during that week. So now that athlete is like, wow, like I'm being heard. I'm going to now dedicate that time to my skill development as well. So it becomes an enjoyable process versus a forceful process. And I think that's when a lot of like my athletes come and tell me, I don't want to do this anymore because no one hears me and understands me, and allows me to do some of these things that I want to do. I don't think it's a desire to completely stop. I think it's that they just never had the opportunity to add certain things into a schedule that is already packed with a lot of, sports or competitions or tournaments or travel.
How do you approach that? Like, say you have a patient or an athlete that comes to you and expresses that to you and expresses that their anxiety has been increasing. They feel like they maybe want to take a break from this sport, but they don't know how to go about that. Now they have confidence in you. They know that they're telling you that, and they know that you're not going to go behind their backs and tell anyone. Like, what do you do like in that situation? Because you have that knowledge of what's going on, but you also have the trust. Like, is it
Mhm.
just a matter of communication? Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so I think a big part of it too is having good communication with my athletes' parents, my athletes' coaches, um, from the get-go, and having clear expectations of my role as a therapist with the families, but also my athletes, right? Like, hey, listen, are you cool with me telling this to your mom and dad or your coach in a way where I'm not going to make you feel uncomfortable, but maybe like say it in a way where they'll start to open up on certain topics, right? I'll say most of the time they say, yeah, that'd be cool. And they trust me. They already, I know that I'm not going to go ahead and make them, be put in an awkward situation or an odd situation. And then telling the parents, hey, listen, this conversation came up. I just wanted to let you know, that they are expressing these certain feelings. Have they expressed things to you, about it? Or what are some things that we can do together to to change a few things? And again, it doesn't have to be dramatic at first, right? It may not need to go there. It's just a matter of like, how do we make this a little bit more enjoyable if that's the issue, or add some other things if that's the issue. But again, it all starts with communication with my parents and also my athletes, and asking for permission too. So I think that asking for permission from someone who is maybe like 16, 17, 14, wow, like they're asking me if it's okay to talk about it. I'm feeling validated in my emotions and my feelings. That's a great support system. If they tell me, Monica, I'm just not comfortable talking about it right now, then I got to respect it to a certain extent. If it's something that I feel like needs to be talked about because there's other issues involved, such as like health issues or perhaps some physical, eating disorders that are happening. Well, it's also like my duty to say something in that case because I feel like it could lead to something else. And I'm very clear with that. And it has happened to me a few times where they've expressed certain things or I may suspect of things. And, I provide as much resource as I can. But I also tell them, hey, listen, I think this is something that I do need to say because I know you want help. And I'm just probably not the right provider, but I can find you someone just like me who can definitely support you, in this process. And I'm going to do that. But again, a very delicate situation, but it all starts with having everyone on board.
I love it. I love it. Um, One of the things I wanted to quickly go back to was the life balance conversation, and I don't want to paint the picture that it's always a bad thing to have a goal and to be driven and not be
Mhm.
distracted by other things, because to be honest with you, I don't know that quote unquote normal teenagers are in a good direction. And I guess similar to my journey through bodybuilding, yes, it was a bit obsessive, but it also kept me away from other things. Like, I
Yes.
guess my energy was put towards something not destructive. Like in college, I didn't drink, I didn't do drugs. Like it kept me away from those things just because by nature of the sport, I didn't have an
Mhm.
interest in those things. And I don't regret that looking back. I don't regret like, oh man, like I never, you know, did those things in my 20s because I never wanted to, and I still don't want to. So it's not always a bad thing, because if a 16-year-old is focused on a goal, if they're traveling the world for figure skating and they're up early, they're learning discipline, and they're not spending like 4 hours on TikTok or you know, it's not a bad thing, maybe like, and then maybe they'll look back and be grateful for their journey in figure skating or dance because it made them different. And maybe those skills will help them when they go for a job and or when they manage a team. Like maybe
Mhm.
there are some positives to it, but I think like we keep saying it's all on the individual, and it's all about communication. Because if you don't have that open line of safe communication, then we really don't have an idea of which one of those ways it's going to fall, whether it's going
Yeah.
to be you look back and have regrets and think negatively about that phase of your life, or if you look back and you're thankful for having gone through that journey.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think I had a very similar journey. Like my high school experience and my middle school experience was like amazing. I was always involved in, dance, my academics. I honestly enjoyed it so much. I did it in the summer. I was never really involved in like anything dangerous. I was just like being a kid, but like loving it. And I had a really good support system. I went to a great, high school that supported the arts. Um, and they were my support system. And looking back, I don't regret anything. I can say I had one of the best high school experiences that I can imagine. Not sure if a lot of people can say that, but I was still able to work on my skill development, travel. So I even took dance into that. I was able to, go to different states and also enjoy it. If I had something in California, I went to Disneyland. Um, I was even able to take some stuff over to overseas and enjoy that product. And it made me who I am today. I enjoy traveling. I enjoy exploring cultures. Um, and it truly has shaped me not only as a practitioner, but also as a person. My experience in the competitive world of, for me, dance.
Yeah, I love it. Want to be respectful of your time, Monica. Before we wrap up, we mentioned misconceptions before, and I forget what the effect is called, but the ability to create nonsense and BS and put it out on the internet, the energy it takes to do that is much less than the energy it takes to correct the community after the BS is out there. So in this world of constant information with no filter as to whether it's good information or bad information, um, I know it's big in the fitness world. I know it's big in our field of physical therapy, and I know it is big in the realms of figure skating, dance, gymnastics, things like that. So, in your opinion, what are some misconceptions or false narratives that just need to be guided toward the exit door, and the door needs to be closed and never opened again?
I think some specific misconceptions is that strength training is going to make you gain weight and make you look bulky. Um, I think that was something that was told to me at a very, very young age. And until I felt comfortable being in a gym, I just wouldn't go. I actually do see that a lot with my dancers. When I give them stuff to do, they go, "I'm not going in the gym," right? Uh, And it's more of, well, why am I going to go to the gym? I'm going to just, I don't know how to navigate a gym. I don't know how to like lift the gym, put things away, things that perhaps like you and I don't think about it anymore. But it's definitely scary as, a young female going into a space that is primarily dominated by males who are lifting and dropping things everywhere. So they think, oh, they're just doing it to get, strong and big and, everything. That's how I'm going to look as well, which is not at all true. That's the way that you execute it is what matters. I think another misconception is that, the athletic successes rely only on talent. I think talent plays a huge role in the way that you develop your skill, but I think also putting in the work with professionals that understand you is equally as important, right? And I hear that way too much. Oh, like you were meant to do this. Like you're so good. You have great talent. But that's not all. That's not all of it. And I think another misconception too is that the other side, push harder, do more. You're going to achieve it if you sacrifice all of these things. Look at so-and-so who sacrificed all of that. They're doing it. Just the same thing as when we talk about work-life balance. It's like, it's not all be all. Just because you push harder, just because you focus on something, give up a lot of things, it's not going to make you a better athlete. It will definitely not make you an overall satisfied well-being. I think lastly too is that your physical appearance is like the only thing that matters, because it's not. We see it way too much in social media now with filters. You can see it online. People in person versus how they look on social media is very, very different. You have filters, you have applications that just change you, that add certain things, that literally changes your body shape online. Like literally will make you look different. And that's where a lot of the misconceptions can come from. So appearances, and what I mean by appearances is things that we see online are not everything. So those are the things that I really feel very strongly about that should not be something that we should continue to represent. I think also one more thing is that it wasn't until I started in PT school that I started to develop more passion toward other things that I was never able to do because I was genuinely scared to do. So run marathons or half marathons, go hiking and, travel and experience things that I was really scared to do because I was scared of getting injured. Because I was always told, don't lift weights or don't run, they're bad for your knees, or don't strength train because you're going to look bulky. If anything, I was actually in started feeling more comfortable in my body when I started to do these things, when I started to lift. I mean, Nick, I remember you coming to a competition that I did at MetLife one year, right? Like, I just felt more comfortable doing things that I never thought I could do. And I was good at it, because I had that drive that I had during my competition days. So that opened up a whole light. And I just wish I had that when I was going through a lot of my competition dancing stage.
My closing question here was going to be, what could you give as a message to the young athletes that may be listening to us? I think what you just said was perfect. Is there anything else you want to add? Anything else that we didn't talk about that you think would be useful?
No, I think just emphasizing, find providers, whether that be PTs, chiropractors, mental health specialists, anyone that are going to understand and support you in your decisions. I think that's so important. If you feel like there could be other people in your world, please seek out, please, tell your coaches and your parents, because those people make a huge difference in the way that you not only develop professionally, but also personally. I think that's one of the things that I would definitely emphasize. It is okay to, and we talked about this previously, to try someone new or perhaps another rehab professional It is okay. It is not like you have to stick this person for 20 years. People change. So people's times change as well. So being okay with change as we continue changing is totally normal.
Monica, I can't thank you enough. I think you are just a breath of fresh air. I think you have a way about you that is just so charismatic and so contagious. I think we started this conversation how you wanted to be the role model or figure that your younger self would have benefited from. I think you've achieved that and have surpassed that. And as a father of two little girls, my gratitude knows no bounds that you exist, because I am just happy that someone like you is out there for them to look up to as a role model someday. Um, so thank you very much for your time. I think this was really, really beneficial. And yeah, where can people find you, Monica, if they want to keep following along with you, and if they have any more questions?
Yeah. So you can follow me on Instagram at Am Performance Rehab. Or you can just shoot me an email. Certainly we'll give that to Nick to write in the show notes. But yeah, I'm always open to having conversations. Throughout the years, both Nick and I have obviously made connections with different types of professionals. And a big part of what I do too is understanding that I might not be that person for someone, but there are other people out there that could definitely benefit from different services, right? And I get that a lot. People who come in for an assessment and I refer them out to somewhere else where they can better be served. And that's a big part of what we do as professionals, right? So we definitely have, and I'm sure Nick has as well, a big group of individuals that we have, that we keep in our circle that are our referrals as well.
Cool. Well, Monica, keep crushing it. I wish you nothing but infinite success, and I know that
Thank you,
that's what
Nick.
you have coming to you, just because I know the kind of person you are.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time. Everyone, thank you for listening. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me or Monica if anyone has any questions that weren't addressed today. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.